Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Bill.
I'm sure you've heard the overnight news. The Collingwood Magpies making a return trip to the Aussie Rules Football Grand Final, coming back from 17 points down to win by 3 over the Hawthorn Hawks.
I did, Bill, and that's very good news, but not good news for your Boston Red Sox, who are struggling.
Hey. They're not my Boston Red Sox.
That's not what you said a couple years ago, Bill. But
I live in Massachusetts. I am New York born. I swore a blood oath that I would never root for the Red Sox regardless of my location.
Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to go back to some previous tape. But before we do that, those of you out there watching should know we're taping a little bit later than normal. We normally tape, I'll leave some of this for the magic behind the curtain. But we wanted to wait till after the Republican debate. And I want to talk about that with you, Bill. But first, some shameless self-promotion. Check out my new spoof video of the MSNBC Lean Forward ad. I'm sure you've seen these ads with Rachel Maddow and Chris Matthews. I have a new one. It's basically.
So are you trying to help MSNBC? Is this a MSNBC ad, or are you appropriating the slogan for the Daily Caller?
Well, I like MSNBC. Hopefully, it helps them. But they have this new ad campaign called Lean Forward, and they have these ads featuring their various personalities, and they're quite easily parodied, I must say. They're pretty good. But
you kind of like Rachel Maddow in front of the Hoover Dam, though.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a very good one. And actually, Mary Catherine Ham, my colleague, already has done an ad spoofing that. She's actually standing in front of a metro escalator that doesn't work, talking about how great government is. But no, this one is one that I did. It's up. I think it's pretty good. Check it out. It's essentially if MSNBC decided to create a Lean Forward ad featuring yours truly, this might very well be what it would look like. So check it out at the Daily Caller on Matt Lewis and the News.
The other news overnight, outside of Aussie Rules football, was the Republican debate. We are taping Friday morning, which is unusual for us, but we made some special provisions so we could give you the freshest blog reaction.
That is what we try to do here, Bill, is bring you the latest reaction. Whether it's...
No, I want to give you my own reaction first, though. I want to be self-serving. Right. So a few weeks ago, I'm not saying I was clairvoyant, but I at least speculated that all the Perry mania might change once he actually is faced with some tough questions. And you didn't dismiss me, but you did note that he is a seasoned campaigner, and therefore he was less likely to flame out a la Fred Thompson or Wesley Clark. But he does seem to be, withering under the heat, and this is his third debate. And a lot of the blog commentary that I've seen coming out of this, and certainly from the left and from folks like Greg Sargent at the Washington Post, James Fallows at the Atlantic, Walter Shapiro at the New Republic, are all like, this guy's just not bringing it, and he is losing his. He's not making the sale early and. Running the risk of this being a much more longer, dragged-out affair because he isn't putting Romney away. Are conservative bloggers saying the same thing, or are they rallying behind their guy and saying, the lamestream media is, not giving him a fair deal?
No, it's funny because as much as everyone decries the lamestream media, I think intellectually honest bloggers oftentimes see things the same way. And I think that it's pretty much obvious that Rick Perry has not done great in the debates so far. I don't think he's done horrible, but I think he did miss an opportunity to essentially, at least make it a two-man race.
Well, it seems to be a disconnect between his persona when he first came out and he was just stumping and he was sort of being big macho Texas. I'm super strong all the time, and then his debate persona is totally different.
Well, I think there's so many interesting things here. First, I think you cannot discount the fact that Mitt Romney, this is his second time around, and that means a couple things. One, it means he's been in a lot of debates, and although Perry is a very experienced politician, he's not that experienced of a debater. But Romney is. So Romney has been in a lot of debates. He's practiced. He's obviously polished. But another point, I think more important, is that Romney, we've already talked about Romney care, and we've already talked about all of Romney's flip-flops, and so they're boring. But what's not boring is Rick Perry's issues. And I have to tell you, if you look at polling, the top three issues that Americans care about right now are the economy, health care, and taxes. And yet, I feel like we've spent at least 50% of the last 2 or 3 debates talking about HPV vaccinations and immigration. Both of which, by the way, are issues that hurt Perry in a Republican primary, and actually might benefit him in a general, but they hurt him in a Republican primary. So, just structurally, he is spending half of his time playing defense, and also against not just Romney, but against Santorum and Bachmann. So there are a lot of structural reasons for this, and I also think, frankly, that Rick Perry is much better on the stump than he is as a debater. But my point is there are a variety of reasons, but the bottom line is that Rick Perry is underperforming in the debates.
So does that mean that, because I think there's a bit of we've had 3 debates in 3 weeks, and perhaps Perry has had to start his campaign on his weakest point of turf, but now there's going to be a bit of a lull between now and the next debate. Can Perry, regain some mojo by doing what he does best, giving speeches, shaking hands, slapping backs, etc.
Right.
Or is just the shine off the apple at this point? People are going to raise the bar and say, "You really got to prove to me that you're going to be able to go the distance here."
Well, I think one of the questions is how important are debates. I venture to say that they're not as important at this point. They're not as important as other factors. Although, here's the deal: people think they're important. And they are important, but maybe not as important as people think, because there are other factors. Rick Perry is raising money. That's important. He's doing a lot of other things right, but he is not doing great in debates. I think that Mitt Romney is doing very well in debates. And I think it has to be frustrating, because if you think about it sort of empirically, the number one issue right now is jobs. Everybody knows that. Rick Perry has a great jobs record, and yet he is constantly playing defense, constantly talking about immigration and HPV vaccinations. It has to be infuriating. And Bill, I believe that in politics it's important to note that the turf is what matters. So if we're talking about HPV vaccinations, Perry is losing. It doesn't matter how eloquent or emotional his response is. He's losing. If we're talking about jobs, Perry is winning. So the question in politics is more important than the answer. So it's about fighting for turf. And as long as the debates spend all this time talking about issues that hurt Perry in a primary, an important distinction, like immigration and HPV, it really doesn't matter how sharp he is, how eloquent he is, he can't win. And that has been the real sort of defining thing about this. He is constantly put in a position to play defense. And look, if we had an hour-long debate about Romney care, Mitt Romney could not win, right? That's my point. I'm sorry.
Well, but I would think once he's out of a debate format. This HPV is only coming up when moderators bring it up and Michelle Bachmann brings it up. I don't know if it's going to be a big issue outside of a debate, because it's not one I think a lot of voters are bringing up, because the main issue is jobs. So I could see that issue fading so long as he's not staying next to Michelle Bachmann. Whereas the media is treating this more like a two-man race between him and Romney, and so Romney's attacks on him get more oxygen, and Romney is not pushing the vaccine issue. Romney is pushing Social Security. I think Perry has to deal with having a better answer for that, but also I think Perry has the opportunity now, if he wants to hit Romney care hard, I think the media would cover that, so long as they're treating it as a two-man race and tracking their their shots against each other. So I think Perry has some control to dictate the terms of this debate now, if he so chooses, because I don't think the Romney care, even though Romney care is old, I don't think it's amazing to me that it hasn't been beat up even more at this point, because everyone's initial attacks at it, like, Pawlenty's Obamacare, everyone kept shrinking back from.
Well,
so perhaps he can still plow that field.
Right, and
I'm trying to have my maximum amount of cliches in this segment today, by the way, and that's what I'm shooting for. Maximum cliches.
It is early, and there will be a lot more debates, and Perry could get better as he goes. A couple other points, though. I think this hurts him because, he already reminds people of Bush. There is Bush fatigue. And putting aside issues, one of the things that Republicans and conservatives really did not like was the fact that Bush was rhetorically unable to push back against the left and against his enemies. And Perry is not helping make the case that he's different than Bush or that he will be more adept rhetorically at defending conservatism than Bush was, and everyone knows beating Obama is the number one thing. The other thing I question is Perry seems to consistently get worse as the debates go on. And I wonder, one of the things that they ought to be doing is you should practice debating during the hour that the debate is held. So if a debate happens at 9 o'clock at night, for 2 weeks leading up to that debate or whatever, you should be having a mock debate, practicing your debate at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So that you're...
And for the kids out there, the same rule applies to the SAT.
That's a good point.
Practice your SATs at 7 in the morning.
That's a good point, because, we have these body clocks and our minds aren't awake at certain times, yada, yada, yada. I wonder if Perry, how Bush used to go to bed early, at least that was the story. And I wonder if Perry's, getting tired, or if they're not doing debate practice at night.
There's this back pain speculation that I know Politico has given some attention to. I forget the name of the person who first flagged it at the second debate, that someone got a photo of the shoes he was wearing, and they weren't his, kick-ass Texas cowboy boots. That were orthopedic shoes, and suggested he recently had back surgery that actually involved adult stem cells, and suggest perhaps he's just in physical discomfort, and that's weakening him. So I suppose all those things are possible, but like any athlete, if you're gonna play at this level, when it's playoff time, you gotta shake off those sorts of injuries, and I don't know if it's right to hang all of Perry's problems on those sorts of physical excuses. He just seems to not have good answers to these questions, and does not seem to perform well under attack. He performs well when he's got a clear field, and he's just sort of popping off, and no one second guessing it. Then he sounds great when he's actually forced to explain himself. That's not his strong suit at any time.
Let me also say this about Romney. I don't know, what's this, the fourth or fifth debate? Romney has done well in every single debate. But it's kind of weird. It's like he's a robot. It's like he checks... There's no... And maybe it's just me, but my sense is there's no...
It's not just you.
There's no emotion. You don't connect with him, but he just checks off all the boxes. Every line is perfectly well delivered. He's done very well. I can't remember Mitt Romney ever having a bad debate, and yet there doesn't seem to be a lot of heart there either. Right.
I think everyone knows that Romney is bereft of any kind of principle or conviction. Part of his success is that he can say anything at any time. Whatever is the most advantageous at that moment, he will say that, and say it with the same level of supposed sincerity and enthusiasm as anything else. And so that gives him a lot of agility and flexibility, So I think that's behooving him so far, and it might allow him to be the last guy left standing. But I presume amongst lots of conservatives and other voters, there's still that sort of gnawing concern that there's just not a lot of there, and so I'm sure that's what the Obama campaign would exploit or try to exploit if it became the two of them. Romney would have an easier time blurring ideological distinctions and not being painted as an extremist, but he would have a harder time saying that he has conviction and you can trust where he wants to take the country.
So anyway, I guess you pretty well. I guess the finishing touches, I would say that Rick Santorum had a good night. I think Newt did okay. Bachmann continues to fade. Nothing horrible, but I just think she continues to fade. And then
what I find strange about the Bachmann assessments, and I think, I'm sorry, I can't remember where I read it. Someone had said, that she, I think it was Mark Halperin at the page, that she had faded from her strong performance at the first New Hampshire debate. She said like 3 sentences at that debate and didn't drool on herself. And she was applauded as being this fresh face. I mean, there's no difference in her performances from debate to debate. It's just that she has no second act, and that's obvious as you see a second debate. So I don't see why anyone's really surprised there.
Gary Johnson had the line of the night, apparently, where he joked about his dog creating more shovel-ready projects than Obama.
No, apparently he ripped that off from Rush.
That's I mean, Gary Johnson actually told Yahoo's Chris Moody, my former colleague, that that the line came from a buddy of his who is a joke writer, used to be a joke writer for Jay Leno, who texted him. But Rush Limbaugh told the same exact joke just hours earlier on his popular nationally syndicated talk show. So who knows? I mean, it's not like it's a brilliant joke that no one else could have ever thought of. But for whatever reason, it really resonated. And it's just interesting that if you look at what the debate audiences really respond to, they tend to like executions. They tend to not like the gay soldiers. But they tend to really like dog poop jokes. That really.
Well, I want to touch upon that actually, because you are seeing a narrative being created in the liberal blogosphere that the party itself has really gone off the deep end based on the audience reactions to things, and we haven't had a lot of audience reaction analyses of debates in a long time. Certainly when you get to the general election level, they have rules that prevent people from applauding anymore, so you can't even assess, audience reactions. But because you have this, enormous applause at Rick Perry's record of executions, you had a smaller group of people, have this guttural scream of approval at the notion of someone dying if they didn't have health insurance. And then last night, people booing someone, I believe, currently serving in Iraq, who is now legally able to say that he's gay, and getting booed for that. And you certainly have folks left trying to make something of this and saying this is where the party is at, and trying to tar all the candidates with that brush. And I suppose there's two ways you could look at that and say you can't subscribe guilt by association to a candidate to what someone says in the audience. That's not appropriate. We could also say none of these candidates took an opportunity to challenge what the audience was doing, saying, you know what, I disagree with that reaction. This issue's been resolved. May not have been a result that I would have chosen, but this is a soldier and he's serving honorably in Iraq, and we should applaud his service. No one took the opportunity to say that.
That is true. Let me make this point though. Sarah Rumpf, RUMPF, who tweets at Rumpf Shaker, RUMPFSHAKER, tweeted Tommy Christopher at Mediaite saying, "I am here. Only a few booed. Many shushed and hissed at booing." So this is a conservative blogger who was there essentially making the argument that it was just a couple of people booing and then other people sort of shushing them. By the way, speaking of booing, on a slightly different note, it seemed like when Newt was introduced, I couldn't tell if they were booing or yelling Newt. I don't know. But
Lou Piniella always had that
sweet
problem.
Lou, right? Lou.
Right.
So anyway, according to this one eyewitness, it sounded worse than it was. But I did notice, by the way, I will say also too, on Twitter, there were conservatives, including, I believe, Catherine Lopez, who were immediately tweeting, I can't believe, don't tell me you're booing a soldier in Afghanistan or Iraq, or I don't remember where, but, there were people in the peanut gallery, conservatives in the peanut gallery, sort of pointing out that this was probably not a smart move.
I guess, I mean, and I think it's really a fair point to say, look, these people are not representative of the party. But I guess the question is there going to be increased pressure on the candidates to prove that and stand up to these folks if they keep coming to debates and keep getting on TV and making the party look like they're that extreme? Are candidates going to have to go out of their way to put some distance there, which could lead to, possible problems with debates?
I think what happens is you go to something like this, and it's sort of like going to a sporting contest. And I think you have this psychological thing where people, do things that they probably wouldn't do in another environment. Sort of, not that it certainly doesn't excuse it, and it also isn't helpful as well in terms of the image.
But it's not like this happens every presidential primary season. I don't feel like I've heard this kind of outburst during presidential primary seasons in the past, and I wonder if that is because there isn't a Karl Rove type figure that kind of sends a signal to the rest of the movement saying, these are the contours of our message, and let's all stay within this relative framework. Let's not all go off half-cocked here and start popping off randomly. And there was some general acceptance that, hey, this might not exactly square with everything I want to say, but I trust my leadership. Let's all go in that direction. And right now, with the rise of the Tea Party, there's this direct repudiation of Republican leadership and saying, you guys don't know where you're going, you're compromising too much, or whatever. Things that the left seems to not be able to fully comprehend why anyone would think that.
Well,
but
the other thing, I mean, a lot of you make some value. You make a lot of points there. I mean, on one hand, I think that it is true that there is no leader of the conservative movement or the Republican Party now. There isn't, and that's not necessarily unhealthy, but that's just a fact. There's nobody that if they say, listen, you need to get in line, you need to do what I'm saying, there's nobody that everyone respects and will fall in line. They'll be like, screw you, man, I'm doing my own thing, you're a rhino. So there is no person who commands, and I would think Rush Limbaugh might be the closest you could have, that if he went out there and said, people, I am telling you to do this, that folks might fall in line behind him. But there really isn't anybody who commands that. And part of it, I think, is the nature of the 21st century. Everybody has a megaphone. Everybody has their own. I had this incident just yesterday, Bill, where I interviewed the Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin. She's been writing, I think, quite eloquently about this anti-intellectual strand within the Tea Party and in the conservative movement, and she's written a lot about it. And I had her on my podcast, The Matt Lewis Show, to talk about it. And I wrote up something at the Daily Caller about it, and I said something to the effect of, just in passing, how, Rubin thinks that Sarah Palin has something to do with this phenomenon. That's it. People started attacking me on Twitter as if I said something bad about Sarah Palin, when I clearly said Rubin said. And then when I pointed it out to them, they said, yeah, but you didn't challenge her. Yeah, but you seem to be agreeing with it. It's like, I seem to be? It's really weird. I don't want to go off too much on a tangent. But, again, the other point, though, would be it only takes one or two people to F something up. I mean, you could have 100 people in that hall or 500 people, and 99% of them can be, gracious and kind, and a couple people can cause a big stir. Fair to say.
Well, speaking of lack of respect for party leadership, Obama's been bedeviled by friction with the so-called professional left for a long time, although some might think that it was a fight he was willing to have, or didn't mind a certain degree of friction to show some independence on his part. But nevertheless, the takeaway from Obama's recent speeches, both his joint address to Congress on jobs and his more recent Rose Garden speech on deficit reduction, folks in the liberal blogosphere are interpreting that as a move towards their way of thinking, and as far as tone and style is concerned, and some at least temporary relief that he hasn't explicitly proposed things like changing the cost of living adjustment formula for Social Security and raising the retirement age for Medicare, which were things that he was speculated to have proposed privately to Speaker Boehner. So you're seeing, for the first time in a long time, more enthusiastic commentary in the higher traffic parts of the liberal blogosphere towards the president. But I would, and so I think the media takeaway from this is sort of that the left is now back in sync with the president. But I would still note that it's not that all is forgiven with some of these bloggers. I do think there's still an underlying concern there that the president is still not in sync with them on policy. And Digby in particular. There's a post from Digby and a post from David Dayen at Fire Dog Lake that I think both said similar things that basically suggested, we still don't trust the president doesn't want to do something with Medicare and Social Security that we don't like, but he's at least seen the light that it's not politically advantageous right now, and the super committee is going to. And since he is laying down a marker on tax increases for the wealthy, there is no way that the super committee will agree to that, that the Republicans on the super committee will agree to that. So that means effectively the deal is off, and therefore we're safe for the moment, and therefore we feel we're relatively put at ease, even though we're not necessarily hugging the president at full strength. And I my own two cents of this is that I think it's premature to assume that the super committee is not going to strike that grand bargain. I went into some of the specifics why I think that in the last show with Kristen Soltis. But my take with this is, if that grand bargain does get done, you may see the rift reopen. Some of the logic right now is that the president is doing the right thing strategically by not having premature concessions. This is the kind of negotiating that some of the left has always been asking him to do. Stand your ground, have a clear position, and get up concessions, have them later. But if that ends up in the same exact place that the president was at in the private talks with Boehner before, it'll be interesting to see, will folks on the left say, well, at least you started from a good place, and if that's where you ended up, that's where you ended up. I think it's probably less likely. More likely to be like, I still hate this end place. I did not want this to be the place. But that all presumes, again, that a deal gets done, which is by no means a certainty. But I do think there are political factors that might drive them to do that, and that would certainly change the left's perception of him.
I got nothing.
Well, I won't pressure. Well, I guess are conservatives thinking that a super committee deal is going to be done, or are they trying to hit Obama now on his embrace of being a so-called class warrior? He said yesterday that I'm a warrior for if they think raising taxes on millionaires and billionaires to have them be the same rates means it's class warfare, I'm happy to be a warrior for the middle class. Are there conservatives that are kind of whooping up and saying, he's running to the arms of the far left, he's embracing class warfare, we got him where we want him, we can now totally bury him on the economy because he's not even trying to appeal to the center anymore? Is that a line of thinking coming out of conservatives right now? I
think it's skepticism. He lost David Brooks. I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago David Brooks's "I'm a Sap" column. But I think if David Brooks sort of sums it up, that wasn't a speech to get something done. Yes, I'm a sap. I believed Obama when he said he wanted to move beyond the stale ideological debates that have paralyzed this country. I think when you lose David Brooks, then it's hard to get Matt Lewis.
I find the Brooks column bizarre because there's nothing in that speech that prevents the grand bargain compromise from happening. I mean, Obama said in the speech he was criticizing Boehner's "my way or the highway" approach, was signaling that what he is saying is not my way or the highway. And in the veto threat that he made, it wasn't a veto threat saying, I will oppose anything that cuts Medicare or Social Security. He was saying, I'll veto anything that has those cuts and does not also raise taxes on the wealthy. He's still proposing a basic compromise, a compromise that David Brooks himself has backed. So why is his ire towards the president and not towards the Republicans that are the ones who are balking at that deal? He and Obama are in the same place on the contours of the compromise. So why is Brooks nitpicking about tone when on a policy basis his beef is with still congressional Republicans?
Well, far be it from me to second guess or try to get inside the mind of David Brooks. But I do think there is generally a perception that Obama is playing politics here, that it's not a sincere effort to work with Republicans to solve the crisis as much as it is that he has accepted the fact that they will probably not be able to work together, and he is now trying to position them as a do-nothing Congress, a la...
Would you suggest that congressional Republicans were not playing politics up to this point and were sincerely trying to solve these problems of debt and deficit?
I think they both are. Sadly, I think that I was hopeful that the Republicans winning would lead to, I'm talking about back in 2010, would lead to divided government, sort of like Clinton and Gingrich in the mid-'90s, and we actually might be able to get things done. But Obama isn't Clinton and Boehner isn't Gingrich, and times are different. So the divided government thing hasn't so far worked out. Although
I saw Clinton actually talk about this with Joe Scarborough on Thursday. Nothing got done when there was divided government between the two of them. They did welfare reform, which
balanced the
really
budget for how many consecutive years? I mean, there was acrimony. Don't get me wrong; it was bitter. But
the guy got impeached. There is no legislative legacies that we talk about today from the time of government between 1994 and 2000. Nothing. The greatest thing they did was financial deregulation,
a time of
which destroyed the entire economy.
Well, but you're the way you measure success is passing bills. I mean, it was a time of peace and prosperity. That's
true,
balance,
but that's not because of divided government. That's because
of balanced budgets. I mean,
I don't think Republicans are embracing the Deficit Reduction Act of 1993.
Well, let me make my make my point though. As I was prefacing it by saying I was hopeful that divided government would work. I actually think it is still better than one party sort of ramming things down the throats of the American people, but it hasn't panned out so far as I'd hoped. But I think the problem is that that the well is poisoned. I think there was an opportunity early on for, and you're going to think this is me being partisan here. I think Obama had a window of opportunity to transcend politics and to decry partisanship and to work with Republicans. I think he turned his back on that opportunity, and I think that it's pretty much there is no trust, there is no relationship between Republicans and Obama. That
you don't think he was trying to do that when he proposed the grand bargain to Boehner?
I don't think so. I don't think that there's that level of trust, and I think that leadership. No, here's where it's unfair. Obama has to be the leader. He has to be the one to make this happen because he's the president, and it's unfair. But leadership has to come from the president. It's really his responsibility to bring people together, and I think that a lot of his comments, his way, his we won the election, continuously blaming Bush, all this stuff has prevented that from happening.
I mean, you don't think he has proposed that he's already made concessions to Republicans saying, "Hey, will you work with me on doing some big things here?"
Well, I think rhetorically he does that, and then he blames Republicans and implies that they're evil. I mean,
what did the Republicans say about Obama during this period?
Well, I agree. I'm saying
they're not really opening a lot of doors.
No, look, Bill, I agree with you there. I think that a couple things. One, I do think that there was a time early on when, aside from Rush Limbaugh, Republicans were going to give Obama a honeymoon, and I think he ruined that opportunity, both rhetorically and by immediately attempting to jam Obamacare down the throats of the American people. So I think he missed his chance to transcend partisan politics. But since that time, you're right, both sides play politics. I'm simply arguing that it's the job of the president, or at least it's the responsibility of the president to be the bigger man and to make things happen. And he has not done it. It's not fair.
You and I will continue to disagree about what has transpired over the past 3 years, but I would say, at minimum, that the possibilities you are suggesting are not totally shut. There is the super committee, which was his idea, to have a fully bipartisan committee that could be passing by a simple majority vote that Congress would have to vote on without filibuster, and then put extra pressure on them by having these trigger mechanisms that fall on the healthcare industry and the military. And I mean, this is all designed to try to get a bipartisan deal that he can say is a signature achievement.
And maybe it will happen.
He's going the extra mile. I mean, at the risk of really angering his base to try to get there. And I think if you want that to happen, or other conservatives sincerely want that to happen, that's the place where to put your attention towards, because that's a live thing, and they have to do something by November, or else the hammer comes down.
Right, and that's your point, that the trigger. So doing nothing may very, very well be worse for Republicans than doing something. So there is an incentive to work together. But I will say, and I don't mean to belabor the point, and I'm not one to go out of my way to take shots at people. But again, missed opportunity. I think Obama should have embraced the Bowles-Simpson proposal. It would have been very hard for Republicans.
The Bowles-Simpson proposal raises a lot of taxes.
Look, I'm talking about politics now, not about not about my preferred policy. I'm just strategically. If Obama had embraced that wholeheartedly, it would have then politically, I think, been much more difficult for Republicans to oppose. He did not do that, and I think that's just one of many missed opportunities of his administration.
I bet if John Boehner and Mitch McConnell went to the White House today and said, let's do Simpson-Bowles together, I think the president would say yes.
Oh, yeah, but that's why it's called a missed opportunity, because he missed his chance to grab
But all he's been trying to do is something along those lines. But why everything he's proposed has been along those lines.
Why didn't he embrace by name that proposal?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why. Because when Obamacare was passed, and I would disagree that it was rammed down people's throats, it was debated over a long period of time, but again, that's you and I disagreeing. Part of that plan was to save money in Medicare, have a level of entitlement reform that would bend the cost curve. And this is something Republicans have talked about for a long time. And instead of even giving half of an applause, you can still say, I don't think it's enough, I disagree with this or that, to run on it in 2010 saying, President Obama cut Medicare by $500 billion. That's basically saying if the president goes first with a controversial entitlement reform package, Republicans are not going to be ideologically consistent about it. They're going to tack left and try to smack you upside the head with it. So Obama has to take from that by saying, there's no way I'm going to lead with my chin again. I'm signaling all I can signal that I will do this with you, but we got to do it together. If I go out there first, why should I trust you that you're not going to punch me in the face because you just did it a year ago?
I think it comes down to leadership, but it's, who knows? I think we probably have to leave it there. You're not upset with me, though, personally, Bill.
I'm not upset with you. All I'm saying is,
I know you're upset that your Red Sox are stumbling. I get that.
But I just think if you want these things to happen, if if you happen to have an audience with Speaker Boehner, Mitch McConnell, I think if you leaned on them, you could make those things happen.
I'm busy.
I think Obama's willing for those things to happen that you are suggesting.
I'm leaning forward. So.
One thing I want to talk about before we wrap up, I thought it was interesting that this YouTube of Elizabeth Warren really took off, where she's speaking to a small group in Massachusetts. For those who don't know, she is newly announced a Senate candidate in the Bay State, and will likely be the nominee because all the primary challengers have not gotten any traction. And she's making sort of this big, philosophical point about success in America, rejecting the class warfare argument from the right, and saying, no matter how rich you are, no one in America has made it solely on their own. Any success isn't part. If you've built the factory with your own money, you still have benefited from the roads that everyone paid for, and the police everybody paid for, and the firefighters everybody paid for, the education that educated your workers everybody paid for. That there's fundamental things that we do collectively that should be acknowledged. And this YouTube went up from a supporter who videotaped her on his or her own and YouTubed it on her own. So I wasn't saying that the Warren campaign necessarily was planning to.
Yeah, it's like a guerrilla video.
You
can tell it's.
What's that?
It's like a guerilla video. I mean, you can tell it's not highly produced. It's her basically giving a stump speech at some event.
Right. But it was not it was not a conservative tracker. It was a liberal supporter, and it went viral from liberals saying, this is the kind of message I want to hear. This is exactly how I want these big fundamental questions being articulated. And towards the end of the week, I just caught a bit on Rush. I don't know to what extent conservative bloggers are also doing this. Russia sort of take this as an aha moment. Now we can call her a socialist. She's talking about how everyone pays for bridges and roads and police and education. And even when I tried to coin a nickname for her by calling her Red Herring because her maiden name was Herrings, and apparently now she's a communist, so she's Red Herring. And I thought that was interesting in part because Scott Brown has not really bonded with the Tea Party since he got elected. He's been trying to play. He's trying to make some tactical moves to the middle to win re-election. And I thought Rush bringing this up was a way to tell the conservative army out there, we need to stop Elizabeth Warren. We need to protect Scott Brown. See, you may not like Scott Brown and everything, but he's going to be far more conservative than Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is dangerous.
Well, and it's interesting too, Bill, because she has to win a Democratic primary, and if Republicans start hitting her now, it could have unintended consequences. I mean, it could help her. Who knows? I think the things she said are sort of hard to argue with. I think it's a matter of emphasis, right? So if you believe that it's the government's money and you get to keep what they let you keep, that's a different worldview than if you believe it's your money, but yes, you're part of a society, and yes, you do pay taxes. So it's a matter of emphasis, but I do think the thing you take from the video is that she is obviously very smart, and I think obviously she has a very strong appeal to progressives. There's no doubt about that. And if she does win the nomination, it'll be a lot of money spent, and it will be quite an exciting race, and a huge contrast between the two candidates, their styles. I mean, I think Scott Brown is more polished than she is, but she is very she has a sort of brand of authenticity to her. So it could be. But
do you think conservatives are getting more focused on this race now, more interested in helping Scott Brown?
You might sort of be keying off something interesting, like a canary in a coal mine, right? So you might be seeing Rush sort of starting that, and it's very possible. I haven't observed that. I just think there are too many things going on right now to worry about a guy that people, aren't in love with, Scott Brown. But maybe I'm wrong, and it very well could be that you're sort of picking up a dog whistle out there.
I want to just comment on something you just said, to the extent that will the attacks are help or hurt? I think it's sort of analogous to Rick Perry. Even more so than that, she is not a seasoned campaigner at all. She's never run for office before, although she's certainly been in the Klieg lights as far as congressional testimony is concerned. But a campaign trail is a different kind of thing. certainly, liberals in Massachusetts, and I think liberals nationally, have presumed she is going to be a strong, tough candidate based on how they've seen her in congressional testimony settings. And they could totally be right. I'm not trying to second guess. I do think there's a history on the left of presuming more electability than there is, basing it on the wrong factors. And some on the right, I think, do this too. They might be doing it with Rick Perry right now.
Well, I think it's entirely possible that I've seen candidates like her commit big-time gaffes that they completely don't understand that it's even a gaffe. They don't get that they're far to the left of mainstream. But in Massachusetts, I don't even know if it would hurt her. That's the thing. She might be. She matches the state.
My point is that a lot of her appeal right now is based on the notion that she would be uniquely electable. And I mean, there's definitely going to be a policy love there too, and maybe that would trump the fact that if she gets really beaten up in the press. But a lot of the argument is that she's going to be. There's a lot of scar tissue here about Martha Copeland.
Right. Well, I think that's a mistake.
She was such a poor candidate, and so there's a presumption that Elizabeth Warren is a uniquely awesome candidate. And so if she's getting really beat up or she makes an unforced error, that may change a lot of people's calculations about her. Of course, I'm not suggesting this is definitely going to happen, but with new candidates, anything's possible.
Absolutely. It's at least a 50-50 chance. Awesome, man.
Well, perhaps we should leave it on that note, Matt.
Good talking with you.
Always good to talk to you. I'm not yelling at you, Matt. I just want you to know that.
Well, I say that for the people out there who haven't been, aren't regular listeners, haven't been listening to the show for literally decades now that we've been doing this.
We've been doing this since 1933.
Off and on.
Through the Great Depression, through the Korean War.
Yeah.
You can tell by my old-timey microphone.
All right, man. Good talking with you.
And we'll talk soon.
All right, bye.